After years of hearing Jimmy Butler trade rumors, the Bulls have finally pulled the trigger. Why do I feel like as fans, we're just blessed right now? I feel like the basketball gods are smiling down on us, and that when this is all said and done, this is going to be one of the most eventful off seasons ever. Anyway, what's up guys, Mike here, and if you did not know, I am a Chicago Bulls fan. And just so no one takes this video the wrong way, I love Jimmy Butler. I mean, based on his competitiveness and his work ethic, Jimmy Butler is one of my favorite players, but I'm a fan of the Chicago Bulls first, and for a while now I've known that the Bulls should trade Jimmy Butler. And if you disagree with me, well, I hope that after this video you've changed your mind. But quickly before that, I just want to say that in this video we're only looking at the Bulls side of this. Tomorrow I'm going to be posting a video on the Timberwolves side of this. So if you're new and you don't want to miss that video, or you don't want to miss any of the videos from this offseason because things have been crazy, then just make sure to subscribe for awesome NBA content. With that out of the way, let's look at why this was a good trade for the Bulls. When evaluating this trade for the Bulls, it's important to remember two things. One, Chicago had no future with Jimmy Butler. I've heard the argument against rebuilding a million times. The Bulls would be trading Jimmy Butler to get a young player who they hope will one day be as good as Jimmy Butler. And yeah, that logic sounds all fine and good, but the thing is that things aren't that simple. Sure, the Bulls might not get back someone who will be as good as Jimmy is right now, but you have to consider the timeline they're working with. In a world where Golden State is going to be incredible for the next 3 years at least, Chicago had no chance at competing for a title. No free agent they could possibly sign would put them in contention with the Cavs or even the Celtics. And because the Bulls had basically no assets on their roster, they had little to no chance of bringing in a game-changing player through a trade. And so if your roster can't compete right now and there's no obvious path for contention, well then, unless you want to be stuck in NBA purgatory, unless you want to be stuck in no man's land, your only real option is to rebuild. And trust me, the Bulls are not making a mistake with their decision to rebuild. This decision is huge for them because they are now officially in rebuilding mode. Now, that does seem obvious, but it's also very important. The last 2 years, the Bulls really didn't know what they were. They didn't know if they were trying to rebuild or if they were trying to contend, which meant they were making decisions that kind of did both. So no longer are we going to see moves such as letting Derrick Rose go to the Knicks and letting Pau Gasol go to the Spurs while also deciding to turn around and sign Rajon Rondo and Dwayne Wade. And so I think we can all agree that it was not smart for the Bulls to be operating in no man's land. With that said, I know some of you and some media members have thought that the Bulls did not get enough back for Jimmy Butler, but I disagree. With Golden State playing at such a high level, it was going to be hard to find a team to trade Jimmy to. At almost any other moment in NBA history, the Boston Celtics would have been the perfect trading partner for the Bulls. But because the Warriors and the Cavs are so dominant, it's hard for teams like Boston to justify trading away their future assets to become a team that's just good enough to lose in the Eastern Conference Finals. And because of this, teams like Boston were not going to give up a ton of future assets. Boston's not all in on building for now. Instead, they want their roster to be competitive for the next 10 years. This put Chicago in an extremely difficult situation to get the most value out of Jimmy. Let's be honest, if the Bulls could have gotten the first, second, third, or even fourth pick, they would have. But after working the phones for weeks, months, and even years really, Chicago's front office finally realized that they weren't going to get a surefire future franchise player in exchange for Jimmy. And yeah, they could have waited and maybe a better trade would have emerged, but we just saw what happened with the Kings and DeMarcus Cousins and what's happening now with the Pacers and Paul George. If the Bulls waited too long, they probably would have been forced to trade Jimmy next year when he's going to be on an expiring contract, which would mean that his value would go down. That risk is simply not worth it. So the Bulls did the best thing they could. They collected 3 solid assets that could blossom into pieces for a future playoff contender. Now, let's just look at Chris Dunn first because he's the obvious third guy in this trade. This season, Dunn definitely struggled, but he was also in a very tough situation. Playing behind Ricky Rubio, Dunn was only given 18 minutes per game, and playing for Tom Thibodeau, a man who is notorious for not playing rookies, every minute Dunn spent on the floor, he knew he was on a short leash. But even though he was put in a tough situation, this year Chris Dunn already established himself as a future defensive ace. And based on the words of Tom Thibodeau, I believe Dunn has a lot of room left to grow. As Tibbs said, he's got really good vision, he's unselfish. His defense, as you know, has been terrific from day one. So I think he'll continue to grow and get better, and I like the way he's working this summer. So at the very least, the Bulls are going to have a defensive stud in Chris Dunn, and he still has a lot of room left to grow. As for the other 2 pieces the Bulls got in this trade, this is where things get very interesting. Looking at the development Zach LaVine has made in his career thus far, it's not impossible to think that one day this man will be an all-star. In just his first 3 seasons, LaVine has already gone from a rookie who averaged 10.1 points per game on 42% shooting to a third-year vet who put up almost 19 points per game on 46% shooting. What's more, Zach has established himself as a 3-point gunner. This year, he made 2.6 threes a game and shot 39% from deep. And yeah, I know he tore his ACL this season, and I know the Bulls' history with ACL injuries has been horrible. Cough, Derrick Rose, why am I still crying about this? Cough. But because the Bulls are now rebuilding, they can let Zach come back slowly. And so, as long as Zach LaVine returns from his ACL injury at full health, the Bulls are going to get an awesome 3-point shooter and athletic scorer at the bare minimum. And because Zach has already earned a reputation for having one of the game's best work ethics, because he's put in countless hours in the gym working on his shot, because his strength and conditioning drills have been described as legendary, Zach LaVine might just be able to develop his game to that of an NBA All-Star. And yeah, I know we're working with a lot of ifs here. We're working with guys that right now are just potential, nothing more. But again, I think the value that the Bulls got back in this trade was actually pretty good. I mean, in last year's draft, the Bulls almost traded Jimmy for just Chris Dunn and Zach LaVine. Now, they also got the 8th pick in a loaded draft, which means, again, the Bulls were not going to get a surefire future franchise player in this trade. And so they rolled the dice and are hoping that either Zach LaVine or Lauri Markkanen develop into an all-star. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Markkanen will no doubt become a great player in this league. What I am going to tell you though is that he's definitely going to have a chance. In this modern NBA, where floor spacing is key to a potential championship roster, Lauri is too good of a shooter to not carve out a role for himself. Not only is he one of the best shooting big men that college basketball has ever seen, as this season at Arizona, he made more 3-pointers than any other big man over 7 foot tall since 2000, but Markkanen may have also proven himself to be the best overall shooter in this draft. This year, Lauri made almost 2 threes a game and shot 42% from deep. What's more, his workouts after college have confirmed that the man has deep range. The NBA 3-pointer is going to be no problem for him. And while being an elite shooter is certainly a skill that's going to give a prospect a chance to grow into an NBA All-Star, at the end of the day, a player still needs a certain amount of athleticism to succeed. We've seen incredible shooters such as Adam Morrison, Doug McDermott, and Andrea Bargnani fail because they were simply not athletic enough to keep up on the court. Luckily for Chicago though, this does not seem to be the case for Lauri. And yeah, he might not be the fastest player on the court, but the fact that he's 7 foot tall and has elite footwork out of the pick and pop make him a matchup nightmare. As you can see here, Markkanen has proven this season that he's agile enough to be able to catch the ball and get to the rim. And if his defender cuts him off, he's already shown that he's capable of rising up over smaller defenders and draining mid-range shots. On the other side of the court, Lauri has also shown that he's not helpless on D. He's not a stiff like some of the other 7-footers we've seen come into this league. Here you can see that he's able to close out on shooters and not get burned. And here you can see that at times when he's switched onto a smaller guard, he's able to hold his own and block the path to the basket. I'm telling you right now, Lauri Markkanen is legit. If this draft wasn't so incredibly deep, scouts across the league agree that he would have been a top 5 pick. They know that he's an incredible shooter. They know that he's going to put the ball in the basket at the next level. The only two knocks that scouts really had on him were that he isn't the greatest rebounder and that he's too thin. Looking at the rebounding, sure, he didn't have the greatest year on the boards last season, but Lauri did average 3.2 offensive rebounds per game per 40 minutes this year. That is a great offensive rebounding rate for a player who spends most of his time on offense spotting up for 3. And as for Lauri being too thin, well, that's absolutely no concern to me at all. This is a man who just turned 20 in May. Yeah, he's skinny now, but that's because he hasn't grown into his body yet. When players like Dirk and Anthony Davis were prospects, they too were seen as too skinny. That's why NBA teams have weightlifting programs. It is a guarantee that Markkanen will add strength and weight to his frame. And when you combine that new strength with his height, remember, he's a legit 7-foot tall power forward, you're going to get a player who can score around the basket and spot up from deep 3 with ease. Then when you combine those two traits with his athleticism, I think the sky is the limit for this man. And on top of everything we've talked about today, on top of the fact that this was the right trade because the Bulls now have direction, on top of the potential that the 3 players that the Bulls got back in this trade have shown, it's also important to remember that because Chicago finally pulled the trigger, they're out of the middle of the NBA. 2 years ago, the Bulls barely missed the playoffs. This year, they were the 7th seed. I mean, what do you really get out of those 2 seasons? Not much, right? Now though, because the Bulls are rebuilding, they can use this year and tank. That's the extra value you get when you trade away a star. Now, instead of drafting anywhere from 14th to 17th next year, the Bulls are going to be one of the worst teams in the NBA, which means it's very likely that they're going to get an awesome draft pick next year. So when you add up Dunn, Levine, Markkanen, and maybe the number 3 or even better pick next year, then you start to see that this was definitely the right trade for the Bulls to make. At the end of the day, I think this was really their only option. And so that wraps up today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, if you're new, we're in the NBA offseason. We're in like an extended Christmas for us. We're going to be grinding out videos all offseason, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss one. And if you're already subscribed, thank you so much for supporting. You're the man, we know this, and as always, have an awesome day, and cue that music.